This is the Truth Network.
Bible Wonders of Habakkuk. Oh, the understanding that is in the bet verse, which has to do with understanding. The second chapter, the second verse. And I would like you to understand, first of all, just how grateful I am, first to God, for letting me do these recordings, and also for you listening and taking part of the journey with me. And hopefully you'll see in this an amazing understanding that I think can just help us all in so many different ways. So here we go. This is the second verse of Habakkuk chapter 2. And the Lord answered me. How cool is that, just to begin with? And the Lord answered me and said, write the vision and make it plain upon tables. Then he may run that readeth it. Whew. Like, man, oh man, is this good stuff. Number one, God is going to answer him, and oh, what an answer he gives him. We're going to get that in future verses. It's going to be spectacular, but it's interesting to me that here God is telling him to convey his understanding. In other words, what you have learned, help other people understand and make it plain, make it simple so that people can understand it. And then one of the really cool things in the verse, and I love the way that this can be interpreted two ways, and I think it's and both. And he says that he may run that readeth it. Well, the way that the Jews interpret or translate that, however you want to put it, is he may be able to read it swiftly and understand it, essentially. While at a quick glance, you can see see what it means, which to me, when I look at something in Hebrew, I can see what it means more than when I look at something in English. Actually, at this point, God's been showing me how clear he is in his expression in the word, I guess. It's just beautiful. But this idea is fascinating to me that, number one, when you read it, right? You can read it, understand it clearly and easily. And number two, that you can run after you understand. Well, there's one huge, gigantic understanding that's so beautiful in this verse. And it's when he says, write the vision. Okay, and that word vision in Hebrew, as I said, I can understand things in Hebrew better than I can understand in English. So when you look at that word vision in Hebrew, it's a het. It's the first letter, which has to do with your union with God. Okay, and so clearly a part of a vision is you got to unite with God in somehow. And then secondly, the second letter is a Zion. And what that is, it's a reflection of God. And so God has shown Habakkuk something very clearly. And here as he saw that's his vision, you see. And he's been given this same idea of what God sees away something now. Habakkuk is also seeing it that same way. Because the third letter is a vav, means that we're going to connect the idea of this Zion to the nun at the end of the word vision, which interestingly ends in an N in the word that was spelled in English. But in other words, he's going to connect what he saw to his faith, right? And do you see how cool that is? I mean, the whole thing is like, oh my goodness. So like when you see something from God, right? It's part of your union with God, and you're hooked, and you hook that to your own belief system. In other words, that whole idea of faith, which is going to be so big as we come up into future verses. But the clear understanding for me on this verse is that word, write it down, okay? And that word, write it down, in Hebrew has to do actually with record it, okay, and engrave it almost. But what I'm doing here actually, and the reason why I want to start off thanking you, is I'm actually recording the understanding that God gave me. And I'm trying to make it plain so that somebody would hear it and quickly understand what it is that I'm trying to say. What a neat thing. But most of all, it's my vision. In other words, as I connect through God, through the word you guys give me, and God gave me this platform in order to be able to share this. But more critical to that, from my standpoint, is where your actual vision, your story, like where you connected with God is your story. And I think that this verse is telling us, as it told Habakkuk, take your story and record it, whether that you write it down or record it like a recording, however you make it plain so that your family, your future generations will have this. And when God gave me this idea many, many years ago, As I was studying genealogy, I'd look up all these families, it was really, really fun. On Ancestry.com, you can go back and look at your grandfather and your great-great-grandfather, and you can see all sorts of shenanigans that led to you. People that broke up and divorced and married and, families, horrible things, death and, all sorts of stuff, okay? War, you name it. It's all there in your ancestry. But the fascinating thing is you don't have anybody's story, so to speak. And when you can find something that's written about one of your ancestors, how precious is that, right? How precious is, here's their story. Well, as I was reading that and thinking about it in my own family, I told my mom and my dad, please write down your testimony for me where you met God. Wouldn't you just love to have your great-great-great-great-grandfather, or maybe even further back, 10 generations back, that ancestry story of how he came to God? Wouldn't you love to know that? Wouldn't that increase your faith to know that you come from a long line, which, by the way, you do, of believers? Okay, I can promise you, because we know that Noah is in your line, is in mine. Okay, we're brothers. I'm just saying. So, and he was a believer, right? However it all works, I can assure you it would be beautiful. Just like we have these stories in the Bible, which I love that verse in the 119th Psalm. It says, I've taken thy testimonies forever as my inheritance, right? And that idea is that oh man, that is my story, okay? But your story is a very important story, especially to your family. And so write it down, record it, however you go about doing it, and make it plain so that somebody can run that reads it. And I love that, the 119th Psalm, another one of my favorite verses, I will run in the path of thy commandments when thou enlargest my heart. In other words, when you have your story recorded for somebody, it will enlarge their heart and it will help them run in faith. That's the whole idea, is your faith spreads like fire. And here's a little bonus coverage because I studied this over the weekend. And why that needs to spread like fire. Did you ever wonder why, there's a whole lot of information on why there were 12 baskets full of breadcrumbs left over and there were 7 baskets of breadcrumbs left over. I'm just going to take on the 12 right this second, okay? The word 12 starts with the letter shin, which has to do with fire. But the root of the word 12 is to repeat. And the idea is 2 times 2 times 2 times 2, okay? And you know that Jesus sent out the disciples, which were the 12, by twos, because he wanted to multiply what was going on. Well, think about what happened. You just had a limited amount of bread, and God multiplied it to show you how his body would be multiplied to the 12 tribes of Israel, okay? In so many different ways. It fits with the number 12 in a lot of miraculous ways. And it also fits with the number 7, with the 7 baskets full, which we'll save for another time. But just for right now, I want you to think about the multiplication of the fire that spreads. Have you ever thought about way fire spreads? It multiplies, okay? And it multiplies very, very, very quickly. And that's the idea of the 12, okay? And so your story is a fire. It just is. And if you will share it, right, hopefully other people will catch on fire like that. That's the whole idea of us coming together, is that our fires come together. And, of course, with the mem that is Jesus, we have shalom, which is that shin and that mem. So think about writing your story so that your fire would multiply. And speaking of multiplication, if you wouldn't mind, if God puts it on your heart, to multiply this podcast with somebody, right? You heard it, you like it, God puts it on your heart, somebody that might like this kind of teaching. Share it with your family or friends, whoever. You can just hit that little button there and share it. Thank you so much for listening.